For generations, gardeners relied on a fermented additive so effective it quietly disappeared from mainstream advice. It wasn't outlawed because it failed. It was pushed aside because it worked too well outside of commercial systems. Long before bottled fertilizers and regulated inputs, this fermented material was common knowledge among small farmers, monastery gardens, and homesteads. Today, it's often whispered about as illegal, not because it breaks laws, but because it challenges modern ideas of how soil should be fed. The additive itself was never a synthetic chemical. It was a naturally fermented byproduct created from materials already present on farms and in kitchens. Over time, as agriculture became standardized and commercial fertilizers took over, practices that couldn't be easily measured, packaged, or sold were discouraged. Some were labeled unsafe, others unsanitary, and many were quietly dropped from official recommendations. This fermented input fell into that category. It introduced massive microbial diversity, rapid nutrient cycling, and biological activity that modern fertilizers could not control. That unpredictability made institutions uncomfortable, so the practice faded, even though the soil never forgot its value. At its core, the illegal fermentation additive was a biologically active liquid created by fermenting nutrient-rich organic matter in water over time. This could include plant material, grain rinses, or food byproducts. The key wasn't the ingredient alone, but the fermentation process itself. Fermentation predigested nutrients and multiplied beneficial microbes before they ever touched the soil. When applied, this liquid didn't feed plants directly, it fed the soil food web. Bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and nematodes exploded in activity. Nutrients locked in soil minerals were released naturally, and plant roots responded with stronger growth and disease resistance. Unlike compost tea, which relies on aeration and short brewing windows, this older fermented additive worked anaerobically. That allowed different microbial communities to dominate, especially those associated with nutrient solubilization and pathogen suppression. These microbes thrived underground, not on leaf surfaces. Compared to synthetic fertilizer, the difference was night and day. Fertilizer delivers nutrients in isolation. Fermentation delivers nutrients wrapped in biology. Plants receiving fermented inputs developed deeper roots, thicker stems, and more balanced growth rather than the soft, fast growth typical of high-salt feeds. The forgotten practice emphasized dilution and timing. The fermented liquid was never poured on soil straight. It was always diluted heavily, often 1 part fermented liquid to 20 or 30 parts water. This prevented overload and allowed microbes to integrate gradually. Applications were made to soil, not foliage, and usually during cooler parts of the day. Gardeners understood instinctively that this was a biological inoculant, not a fertilizer. They treated it with respect, not force. One reason this additive quietly vanished was its impact on plant disease. Soils treated with fermented inputs consistently showed fewer fungal and bacterial outbreaks. Pathogens struggled to compete in biologically crowded environments. Roots surrounded by beneficial microbes were harder to infect. This wasn't magic, it was ecological pressure. By filling every niche with beneficial life, harmful organisms were starved out. This approach conflicted with later chemical disease control models that relied on elimination instead of balance. Fermented additives don't fit neatly into regulations. Their microbial content changes over time, and their strength depends on temperature, ingredients, and duration. That kind of variability made them, unsuitable for mass recommendation. Commercial agriculture favored predictability over resilience. Additionally, fermentation smells, takes patience, and requires observation. Those traits just don't align with quick-fix solutions. As a result, the practice was labeled outdated, risky, or even unsanitary, despite centuries of successful use. As soil health declines and gardeners search for alternatives to constant feeding, interest in fermented inputs is returning. People notice that compost alone sometimes isn't enough. Fermentation fills a gap by delivering biology in a form compost can't provide on its own. Modern gardeners, experimenting carefully, are finding what older growers already knew. When used correctly, fermented additives restore soil function instead of just feeding plants. They help gardens become self-sustaining again. The real lesson isn't about breaking rules, it's about understanding why certain practices were forgotten. This fermented additive wasn't banned because it failed. It was sidelined because it empowered gardeners to build fertility without dependency. Soil doesn't respond to control, it responds to life. Fermentation is one of the oldest ways humans learn to partner with biology rather than override it. The fact that it still works today should tell us something important. If you want to keep uncovering forgotten gardening practices that actually improve soil instead of selling shortcuts, subscribe to Gentle Herb Gardening and share this with someone who believes good soil only comes from a bag.